mesmerized by these eyes. I'm so happy, I can't lie, mesmerized by these eyes.